Welcome to the history section. So, at the close of the 17th century, we see this really pivotal geopolitical moment for the French crown in North America.
Yes, the focus becomes the occupation of the Mississippi River mouth.
And with it, a claim over this enormous, really poorly defined region we now call Louisiana.
Exactly. And this strategic necessity, it wasn't a new idea. It was originally championed by La Salle.
But La Salle was gone by this point, and his expeditions had largely failed.
They had. But the idea found new life, a new urgency, and that impetus really came from Henri de Tonty.
La Salle's very dedicated former lieutenant.
The very same. He knew the interior, its challenges, and its potential better than almost anyone.
And he understood that just claiming the territory wasn't nearly enough.
No, he saw that immediate action was absolutely mandatory, especially with English interest in the region resurgent after the War of the Grand Alliance.
So he presents a case to the French government.
He does. He puts forth three fundamental arguments, all interconnected, outlining exactly why seizing the Mississippi Delta was strategically indispensable in the late 1690s.
And these arguments, they're not abstract. They're deeply pragmatic, right? Blending military strategy with economic goals.
Absolutely. First, Tonty positioned Louisiana as a crucial offensive military asset.
How so?
It would serve as an irreplaceable base of attack against the Spanish colonial holdings in Mexico.
Which would have been a major strategic advantage, aiming directly at France's old rival.
And at their silver wealth. Second, he argued for establishing the territory as a depot.
A sort of central hub.
A major storage and trading hub for all the resources coming from the interior. He specifically mentioned furs and lead ore, which was known to be plentiful in the upper Mississippi Valley.
And the third argument, which seems to have been the most pressing, that was a defensive one.
It was tied directly to the threat from England.
Right.
Tonty maintained that a prompt French seizure was the only way to prevent the English from mastering the entire western half of the continent.
So the goal was to create a kind of barrier.
A continuous cordon connecting New France up in Canada with the Gulf of Mexico. The idea was to bottle up the English settlements along the Atlantic coast.
Because if the English got the Mississippi, they would have cut the continent in half.
And completely isolated the French interior settlements. It was an existential threat to their entire North American project.
And this fear, it wasn't just a vague anxiety, it was an active race.
A very active race. A few years after Tonty's lobbying, you have Sieur de Remonville proposing a settlement company to formalize the occupation.
And he's stressing the same urgency.
He is. He states that prompt action is absolutely indispensable to preempt the English.
And the research really bears this out.
It does. The English were, at that very moment, on the precipice of seizing the Mississippi mouth themselves.
They had an expedition planned.
An expedition was being prepared under a specific grant that had been issued to two noblemen. It was the swift intervention of the French crown, spurred on by these pleas, that prevented it. A real turning point.
And this contest, it really throws a spotlight on the huge ideological difference between the two colonial powers.
Oh, absolutely. A fundamental cleavage.
I mean, if we imagine a hypothetical Louisiana founded by the English, the one Tonty was so afraid of, it would have looked entirely different.
History tells us it would have. That hypothetical English Louisiana would have been based on voluntary migration.
And the colonists would have brought their political traditions with them.
English common law, political freedoms. You would expect to see settlements based on self-rule, electing their own magistrates, relying on personal effort, not government handouts.
And the result would have been stronger communities, presumably.
Historical analysis suggests they would have been healthy, orderly, well-rooted in the soil, hardy communities growing from individual initiative.
But the French Louisiana that actually emerged was built on the complete opposite philosophy.
Diametrically opposing principles. The ruling philosophy was absolute monarchy.
So the French crown saw the colony as its personal property.
Its child, as it was called. This meant the administration was rigid, centralized, intensely paternalistic.
And run by the military.
Primarily military figures, there to enforce the arbitrary power of the king. And instead of encouraging independent immigrants, the crown organized and shipped out what were called emigrant cargoes.
So settlers who were sent, whether they wanted to go or not.
Willing or unwilling. often to the fever-stricken banks of the lower Mississippi.
And the quality of these forced settlers, that became a major issue right away.
A huge obstacle. These cargoes were often filled with individuals the administration saw as expendable.
The dependent classes.
Those whom fortune and their own defects had sunk to dependence. They arrived dreaming of gold mines and pearl fisheries.
And instead they found
The necessity of sustained, backbreaking labor in a hostile place, which they found strange and odious. They'd been sold a fantasy.
And this whole system was based on what some have called the core withering maxim of the French colonial model.
Which was that the colonists' labor was not their own.
It was owed to the state.
Owed entirely to their masters, the crown or its agents, not to themselves. This systematic denial of individual economic incentive, it was baked into the colony's foundation from the very beginning.
And it basically ensured Louisiana would struggle to establish the kind of agricultural stability that the English colonies achieved almost right away.
Yes, precisely.
So with that philosophy set, the actual job of securing the claim fell to Pierre Le Moyne d'Iberville.
The celebrated naval officer. He accepted the mission in 1699, knowing full well that the main imperative was to beat the English to the punch.
So he set sail in late 1698.
With 2 frigates, the Badine and the Marin, carrying soldiers, supplies, everything he needed. It was a high-stakes race.
And when he reaches the Gulf Coast, the competition is immediately obvious.
It is. Approaching Pensacola Bay, he finds 2 Spanish ships already anchored there, actively building a stockade fort. Spain was asserting its own claim against both France and England.
How did Iberville handle that, a direct confrontation?
No, he was cautious. He knew a direct military engagement could spark a major European war, so he chose not to challenge them at Pensacola.
He just moved on.
Left them undisturbed and continued west, spending the next month exploring the coastlines of modern-day Alabama and Mississippi, looking for the real mouth of that great river.
And he finds it in early March 1699. How did he know for sure it was the Mississippi?
The physical evidence was overwhelming, a strong, muddy current of fresh water pushing out into the Gulf.
So he heads upstream.
For 11 days, battling the current until they reached a village of the Bayagula Native Americans.
And it's there that they find the definitive proof linking them back to La Salle's journey.
That's right. Iberville found the Bayagula chief wearing a blue capote, a short cloak.
And the chief told him where he got it.
He proudly stated it was a gift from Henri de Tonty himself 13 years earlier when Tonty was searching for La Salle.
So the river was confirmed.
It was. And to make it even more certain, Iberville's younger brother, Bienville, later recovered a letter that Tonty had left for La Salle with another chief. Written proof.
So with the claim finally substantiated, Iberville sets up the first French foundation.
He does. He moves back to the coast of what is now Mississippi and builds a small stockade fort at the Loxie, naming it Fort Maurepas.
And he leaves a garrison there.
80 men under the Sieur de Sauval to hold the country for Louis XIV before he heads back to France for more supplies.
But it was a weak position, wasn't it? Chosen more for defensibility than for its access to the river itself.
A very weak position, and that choice would prove to be a problem down the line.
And the strategic importance of what he'd done was confirmed almost immediately, with the incident known as the English Turn.
Yes. Bienville, while he was exploring the Mississippi upstream, comes across an English corvette.
Right below where New Orleans would eventually be built.
Exactly, commanded by a Captain Louis Bank. And critically, this English ship was carrying French Protestant families, Huguenots.
So they were trying to establish their own settlement.
Under an English company founded by refugees in the Carolinas. This was the exact existential threat that Tonty had warned about.
And Bienville's reaction was
creative.
a strategic deception, as the French government later called it. He approached Captain Bank and flatly lied to him.
What did he say?
He assured him that the river they were on wasn't the Mississippi at all. He claimed it was another secondary river claimed by King Louis, and that the French had a huge, heavily armed fort just a short distance upstream.
And the English captain believed him.
The account says the 2 credulous Englishmen bought it completely, turned his ship around, and sailed away, fearing a confrontation.
A clever move.
Yeah.
But that incident also presented the French crown with a huge opportunity for growth.
A massive opportunity. A French engineer on the English ship managed to meet Bienville in secret.
And he delivered a petition, signed by 400 Huguenots in the Carolinas. These were established, industrious settlers who wanted to move to Louisiana.
And what do they want in return?
Just one thing, liberty of conscience. The freedom to practice their Protestant faith. They promised absolute loyalty to the French crown in exchange.
And Louis XIV's response, through his Minister Pontchartrain, it's just a devastating example of ideology overriding pragmatism.
It is. The king refused the petition outright.
And his reason.
Uncompromising. He stated that he had not expelled these heretics from France just so they could set up a republic in America.
So Louisiana had to be an extension of the absolute Catholic French state, no exceptions.
That was the clear implication. The potential strength offered by hundreds of established families was just thrown away in favor of strict religious control. This decision really doomed the colony to decades of dependency.
So if the founding was undermined by that kind of rigidity, the next phase, the economic direction, seems to have been undermined by pure fantasy.
It really was. When Iberville went back to France for reinforcements, his instructions for developing Louisiana were just utterly divorced from the practical needs of a new settlement.
What was the crown focused on?
It was a court more interested in New World myths than colonial reality. Iberville was told to seek out pearl fisheries.
Despite the fact that they knew the pearls there were bad.
The instructions themselves noted that Louisiana pearls were uncommonly bad. He was also ordered to catch bison calves and try to domesticate them for their wool.
Domesticating bison for wool, that really says it all about how misplaced their focus was.
It does. But the single biggest priority wasn't pearls or bison wool.
He was mining.
The search for mineral wealth, gold and silver, was explicitly called La Grande Affaire, the Great Affair. And this obsession ensured that all the resources, all the attention, was channeled into speculation instead of stable agriculture.
And this had immediate consequences for where the settlements were actually located.
It did. The initial weak Fort Epiloxy was moved to Mobile Bay. A third post went up at Dauphin Island.
But the Mississippi River itself, the whole reason for the colony, was neglected.
Largely neglected, guarded by just a small, ineffective redoubt. The Great Waterway was left undeveloped, which just reflected the Crown's fixation on speculative returns rather than long-term strategic development.
And the settlers they attracted with these promises of instant gold weren't exactly suited for the hard work required.
Iberville wrote about it himself. He said the most valuable men were the Canadian veterans, hardened by the frontier.
And the rest.
The rest were largely beggars sent out to enrich themselves. They arrived expecting the government to feed and clothe them while they looked for gold. They saw farming as an unpleasant distraction.
Which leads directly to a major failure of this whole paternalistic system.
Yeah.
The supply chain just breaks down.
The logistics were catastrophic. The Crown would send out these emigrant cargoes, like the 20 marriageable girls in 1704 and 23 more in 1705, all described as nurtured in virtue.
To try and create stable families?
Right. But the shipments of food and essential supplies never matched the population growth. The colonists weren't growing enough food, so famine and disease became chronic. People were forced to live on shellfish scavenged from the coast.
And all this failure and disease, it created an environment of intense internal conflict among the officials.
The infighting was extraordinary. Nicolas Lassalle, the commissaire, wrote to the minister and openly called Iberville and his brothers thieves and knaves, accusing them of corruption.
And the local priest got involved, too.
Curé Lavant. He actively stirred up trouble among the soldiers against the command structure, especially against Bienville.
It's fascinating how quickly personal drama started to dictate colonial policy.
Oh, there's a perfect example of that. The directress of the King's Girls, the woman in charge of the marriageable women, she developed a personal grudge against Bienville.
Why?
She accused him of interfering with her own marriage prospects to a major boy Briand.
And on that basis,
she wrote directly to the minister, arguing that this personal slight alone should disqualify Bienville from governing the entire colony. It just shows how petty intrigue could overshadow the entire administration.
And Bienville, despite being acquitted of corruption charges twice, his own reports reveal the contradictions in the French model.
They do. He reported back to Versailles that the only colonists who were truly prosperous were a few thrifty men from Rochelle who had opened successful dram shops.
But these successful entrepreneurial colonists wanted to leave.
Exactly. They'd made their money and wanted to go home. And Bienville's solution shows the complete philosophical disconnect.
He wanted to force them to stay.
He argued a watch should be kept on them and that they should be forced to stay to enrich the colony. It effectively turned Louisiana into an economic prison where self-reliance was penalized.
And what about labor? We see early attempts to use enslaved Native Americans.
But that failed due to frequent escapes. So Bienville proposed a a very pragmatic but morally detached solution involving African slavery.
The exchange program.
He proposed bartering 3 enslaved Native Americans for 2 African slaves from the West Indies. His logic was purely practical. African slaves confined to islands would be less able to escape in the unfamiliar North American landscape.
But the court in France refused the plan.
They did, but not on moral grounds. The refusal was based on the cold commercial fact that the West Indian traders were only offering their lowest quality African slaves in the exchange, which the French administration deemed a bad deal.
So by 1711, Louis XIV is exhausted by the cost and the constant problems.
Yes, especially with the War of the Spanish Succession dragging on, he decides to divest the crown of direct management.
And this brings in the era of the Crozat monopoly.
A massive concession. The entire territory of Louisiana, the Mississippi, Missouri, and Ohio drainages was leased to Antoine Crozat, one of France's wealthiest men, for 15 years.
And he got a total monopoly on trade and mines.
Complete monopoly. And the legal system imposed was the Coutume de Paris, the civil law code of the French capitals.
And what was the immediate impact of this private monopoly on the colonists who were already there?
It was devastating. The few settlers had a modest but vital trade going with the Spanish at Pensacola. Crozat's agents cut that off immediately.
They weren't allowed to trade at all.
Not retail or otherwise. When they petitioned the new governor, Cadillac, to allow them some small retail trade, he called the petition seditious and threatened to hang the man who brought it.
So the despair among the administrators themselves just grew.
Governor Cadillac wrote to the minister and said the whole country is not worth a straw. Another official, Derdeguet, lamented that only 10 or 12 families were even farming, blaming the idleness of the inhabitants and the extravagance of their wives.
And even the plan to import wives was failing.
The yearly shipments continued, but the intendant, Duclos, reported that a recent batch of 12 women were so ugly that the inhabitants are in no hurry to take them.
And he actually gave advice on this.
His cynical advice was that in the future, good looks should be more considered than virtue. Many of these women were sourced from Parisian hospitals and houses of correction, like the Salpêtrière.
But Crozat's real financial plan was based on contraband trade with Spanish Mexico. How did that go?
It failed completely. Spanish officials were incredibly vigilant and blocked all his attempts. Crozat also complained that the king's own officers in Louisiana were running their own smuggling operations, undermining his official monopoly.
So he gave up.
He abandoned his charter in 1717 at a considerable personal loss.
And the failure of that private monopoly sets the stage for the most infamous chapter in Louisiana's history, the Mississippi Bubble.
John Law, the Scottish economist and financier, takes control of the colony through his Western Company.
And he uses Louisiana's imaginary gold mines as the basis for a massive system of financial credit in France.
Essentially, to rescue France from its national debt, it fueled one of the most incredible speculative manias in European history.
And the French government actively helped promote this illusion.
Oh, they did. They ordered that royal banknotes be accepted at par for company shares, which artificially inflated demand. And to convince the public, ingots of fake Louisiana gold were displayed in Paris shop windows.
A total frenzy.
Fortunes were made and lost overnight, all based on the promise of New World riches that simply did not exist.
But on the ground in Louisiana, things were still terrible. The colony was still a restrictive, state-controlled prison.
Absolutely. No inhabitant could leave without official permission. Jews were expelled, Protestants excluded. Settlers could only buy from and sell to the company's agents at fixed prices.
And to get the labor they needed, they just doubled down on forced migration.
They did. Vagabonds, criminals, women of the town were seized from all over France to populate Louisiana. The memoirist Saint-Simon actually approved of it as a way of purging France.
But this period did see one really important strategic development. Bienville came back as governor.
He was reappointed in 1718, and his most enduring act was laying the foundations of New Orleans,
Which finally gave the scattered colony a real capital, a geographic anchor.
a vital center point, yes, even if the colony itself remained on the brink of collapse.
And the financial collapse in Paris was inevitable.
By the early 1720s, the bubble burst. Shares plummeted, Law fled France for his life, and it triggered a nationwide financial panic. The company had spent 8 million livres on Louisiana with zero profitable return.
And even after that disaster, the fundamental problems in Louisiana didn't change. It was still trapped in this cycle of improvidence and arbitrary rule.
The settlers consistently looked to France to solve their problems. A classic example is livestock. They would habitually butcher the breeding stock meant for propagation.
They were feeding their future herds.
Essentially, yes, which forced the crown to issue this incredibly severe royal edict.
Forbidding them from killing their own animals.
Without official permission, under penalty of a massive fine. And if you killed another man's cattle, the penalty was death. It shows how deeply the crown had to interfere just to keep the colony alive.
So officially, the watchwords are authority and order, but the reality is just disorder.
And constant infighting among the officials. The only time they presented a united front was when they were conspiring to deceive their masters in France about the true state of the colony.
And this internal weakness was disastrously exposed when major Native American resistance began to flare up, starting with the Natchez Uprising.
In 1729, the Natchez rose up against the French at Fort Rosalie and massacred nearly all the European inhabitants. The French reaction was immediate panic.
They feared a general conspiracy.
A conspiracy of all the southern tribes to wipe them out completely.
And the conflict that followed really hinged on tribal alliances.
It did. The powerful Choctaws sided with the French, but the equally formidable Chickasaws allied with the surviving Natchez.
And the Chickasaws had support from the English.
Direct support. Arms and trade goods from English traders coming out of the Carolinas.
And Governor Perrier's response to the uprising was brutal.
His letters document the reprisals. He reported the execution of Natchez prisoners. 6 captives, 4 men and 2 women were burned alive. Others were shipped as slaves to St. Domingo.
And the Chickasaws proved to be very effective opponents.
Highly effective. They successfully resisted French attacks by entrenching themselves in these incredible stockade forts made of thick tree trunks that French cannon fire couldn't penetrate.
So eventually Perrier is removed, and Bienville is brought back for a final term. But the colony is still broken.
Bienville's final assessment paints a desperate picture. The European population had decreased. The enslaved African population, now at 2,000, had grown and had recently conspired in a massive insurrection plot.
And they were starving.
The colonists were starving, subsisting on the seed of reeds and wild grasses, a complete agricultural failure.
So the Mississippi Company finally gives up in 1731, and the colony goes back to the crown.
A return to paternal despotism, but with one crucial change.
The commercial monopoly was abolished.
Finally abolished. Trade was not just permitted, but actively encouraged with bounties. Colonists could finally get supplies at reasonable prices.
So the colony slowly starts to take root, but it's still fundamentally weak compared to its English rivals.
The consensus is that it lacked the air of liberty. The populace had never been trained in self-reliance or individual initiative. The absolutist system was a failure. Bienville, wounded by criticism of his failed Chickasaw campaigns, finally offered his resignation.
So with the lower Mississippi weakly secured, French attention turns back north, to the Illinois country, the link between Canada and the Gulf.
Yes, home to some of the earliest French settlements in the interior, like Kaskaskia and Cahokia.
And these were communities that grew out of missions, populated by coureurs de bois who intermarried with converted Native American women.
A unique mixed heritage frontier society.
But the security of this region was constantly challenged by one group in particular, the Outagamie, or Foxes.
They were renowned as fierce enemies of the French-allied Illinois tribes, and their strategic position made travel and trade between Canada and Louisiana almost impossible without severe risk.
So the French administration decided they had to be removed.
It became a deliberate policy of destruction. They saw the Outagamie as an obstacle that had to be physically eliminated to secure the West.
The first major military attempt was the 1716 siege, led by Captain Louvigny, but it was compromised from the start.
By logistics, the expedition was accompanied by over 40 barrels of brandy,
Which led to
severe disorder and insubordination among the French and their allied forces before the battle even started.
But despite that, they faced a remarkably sophisticated defense.
The Outagamie village was enclosed by 3 rows of heavy oak palisades, and inside they dug a shallow trench, a rifle pit, allowing them to fire through the logs while being protected.
So Louvigny had to use advanced European siege tactics.
He did. When cannon fire proved ineffective, he resorted to classical siege engineering. He dug trenches and then a protected approach trench, a sap, to get closer,
With the goal of undermining the wall.
and filling the space with gunpowder to blow them up.
Faced with that threat, the Outagamie were forced to parley, and the terms were harsh.
Extremely harsh. They had to pay the costs of the war in furs. They had to make peace with all French allies. And most telling, They were ordered to wage war on the distant Pawnees to capture new slaves to replace those killed among the French allies.
So it was a transactional approach to indigenous warfare.
Completely. And 6 chiefs' sons were taken as hostages to ensure they complied.
But the peace didn't last. And when the Outagamie attacked again, the response from Versailles was chilling.
The colonial minister issued a royal mandate. The Outagamie must be reduced, or rather destroyed. He even promised a reward to the officer who succeeded.
A clear policy of extermination.
A definitive policy goal, yes.
But implementing it was difficult. Lignerie's campaign in 1728 was a failure.
A major force of 1,500 French and Allied warriors marched on the Outagamie village only to find it deserted.
And they only captured a few people.
3 women and 1 old man. The women were enslaved, and the old man was burned alive by the indigenous allies. A demonstration of the brutality of the conflict.
The decisive blow finally came in 1730.
The 1730 slaughter. A massive French and Allied force trapped a large group of Outagamie in a stockaded grove. The battle was a massacre.
How many were killed?
Approximately 200 warriors and an estimated 600 women and children. A catastrophic demographic defeat for the tribe.
But they weren't entirely wiped out.
No. By 1736, it was estimated only 60 to 80 warriors were left, so they incorporated themselves with their neighbors, the Sacs or Sakis,
forming the unified Sacs and Foxes.
The same nation whose fighting spirit was displayed much later in the Black Hawk War of 1832.
So, turning from that conflict to the push westward, the French presence on the Mississippi, however flawed, did provide a base for exploring the Great Plains.
And this phase was really characterized by the unique spirit of the French-Canadian pioneer, this indomitable spirit of adventure.
Thriving in the liberty of the wilderness.
Yes, which became the field of their most noteworthy achievements.
And the motives for this expansion were all tied to imperial policy.
Finding gold mines, opening trade with New Mexico, securing territory from Spain, and the recurring dream of finding a water route to the Pacific, which they often mistakenly linked to the Missouri River.
An early example of this is Pierre-Charles Le Sueur's expeditions into Sioux country.
One of the most determined early pioneers, he was building stockade posts like Fort Perot and Fort Louisiana in what's now Minnesota as early as 1700.
And his main goal was to secure a mining monopoly.
He was looking for copper and lead, but what he found instead were these extensive beds of blue and green-colored earth.
The Blue Earth River.
Exactly. And he became convinced this earth was a precious commodity. He actually dug up and transported 4,000 pounds of it all the way back to Versailles,
presenting it to the French court
as a valuable discovery. In reality, it was geologically worthless. He died before he could return, and the post was abandoned. A perfect symbol of these failed speculative ventures.
Meanwhile, the Missouri River remained the ultimate prize.
The key to the Western Sea, or the Spanish silver mines. By 1704, you have over 100 independent Canadians scattered along its length, pushing the boundaries.
And this ambition was formalized in Hubert's proposal in 1717.
A very detailed proposal. He advised ascending the Missouri to its source to find the Spanish mines and the river to the Western Sea. He even noted the specific dangers, advising the use of sturdy wooden canoes because of all the submerged trees, the snags, and the Missouri Current.
But early attempts to trade with the Spanish to the southwest were met with hostility.
Juchereau de Saint-Denis tried to open trade in Texas between 1715 and 1716, and it was seized twice by the Mexican viceroys. Spain's exclusive colonial policy was strictly enforced.
So exploration shifted. In 1719, Bernard de la Harpe pushed up the Red River.
A journey of tremendous difficulty. He had to navigate the Red River Raft, a massive natural logjam that choked the river for miles. They struggled through inundated jungles with water moccasins and alligators.
But he did gather valuable information about the Native American populations there.
He reached the Nassanites, an agricultural tribe, and recorded a devastating demographic fact. Their population had dropped from 2,500 to just 400 in 10 years, mostly due to wars with the Chickasaws and Osages.
And as he continued, he found evidence of significant Spanish contact.
He did. Near a branch of the Arkansas River, he met 7 Native American chiefs mounted on excellent horses with Spanish-style saddles and bridles.
And they led him to their villages.
A cluster of villages with an estimated 6,000 people living in these high, dome-shaped structures of clay and straw. A stable, populated civilization previously unknown to the French.
This complexity of indigenous politics is also shown by Dutisney's expedition that same year.
He travels from the Illinois country across Missouri. He manages to visit the Osages and then their enemies, the Pawnees.
That the Pawnees stopped him from going further west.
They fiercely forbade him from pushing on to the Paducas or Comanches. It showed that French movement was completely regulated by the balance of power between these Native American nations.
And the geopolitical competition heated up in 1724, which led to the intervention of Etienne de Vignard, Sieur de Bourmont.
Bienville got reports of Spanish incursions and plans to build a post on the Kansas River. So Bourmont was sent to establish a French presence and open peaceful trade. He built Fort Orleans on the Missouri River.
And then his mission became diplomatic, to secure peace with the powerful Comanches. And the caravan he assembled for this was remarkable.
It was a small group of Europeans, 300 Missouri and Osage warriors, 300 squaws serving as beasts of burden, 500 children, and hundreds of dogs dragging loads. A whole society on the move.
And the journey was incredibly difficult, even for Bourmont.
He suffered from dysentery and had to be carried on a litter. But he succeeded. He reached the Kansas people and arranged a council with the Comanche chiefs.
And the treaty he secured was a major diplomatic victory.
He presented an array of gifts, guns, knives, mirrors, vermilion. He gave the Comanche chief a large French flag as a pledge of peace.
And the chief's response was memorable.
He accepted the flag and said, "The Spaniards are like this handful of earth, but you are like the sun." This diplomacy achieved the crucial French objective of securing peaceful passage toward New Mexico.
And the ultimate goal, a direct route to Santa Fe, was finally achieved 15 years later by the Mallet brothers.
In 1739, they ascended the Platte River and crossed the plains of Colorado, proving a direct path was possible.
And their journey highlights the harsh realities of prairie travel.
For long stretches, their only fuel source was dried buffalo dung. But they made it to Santa Fe, spent the winter, and returned via the Arkansas River, confirming a viable, if difficult, route.
And this success immediately spurred Bienville to action in New Orleans.
He dispatched an officer, Fabre de la Bruyere, in 1740, with the Mallet brothers as guides.
And the mission was twofold: find a better route and
remarkably, to resolve the lingering doubt among officials as to whether the western regions were contiguous to China and Tartary.
That doubt, even in 1740, is just a startling look into the geographical confusion that still existed.
It is, but Fabre de la Bruyere's expedition failed. It got hopelessly entangled in the shallows of the Canadian Fork, the Arkansas, and returned unsuccessful, leaving the interior's mysteries unsolved.
And the history of French Louisiana, from its strategic beginnings to its chaotic reality, just consistently shows how ideology and financial fantasy kept overriding practicality,
leaving a legacy of impressive exploration but ultimately unsustainable colonization, a very stark contrast to the growth of its rivals.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed learning something new. That's all for now, but in case you didn't notice, there are a lot more episodes on this subject available on this channel. If you're enjoying these historical podcasts, please like and subscribe and share with other history buffs.
While this is an AI recording, the research that has gone into this production is comprehensive and focuses on very specific moments in history, designed to bring as much detail to the listener as possible. Thanks again for listening in.